Hey guys, tonight we drift back to a world where horned helmets are optional, ovens are stone, and flower dreams carry you across stormy seas. You're a Viking, not the pillage and plunder type tonight. No, you're on a slightly different quest, one that smells faintly of toasted barley and ambition. You stand on the slippery wooden deck of a longship cutting across the black waters of the Black Sea. A bag of precious rye flour tied to your belt and a loaf-shaped dream lodged in your chest. The wind bites hard. Salt crusts your eyebrows. The sky above doesn't care that you're a future culinary legend in the making. All it sees is another scruffy northerner trying to dodge fate and drown in the attempt. You squint toward the southeast, where rumors swirl of a shining city named Constantinople, a place of gold roofs, endless markets, and stomachs too spoiled to understand what a real crust is. And of course, you probably won't survive this. You've got no license to bake, no knowledge of Greek, and no clue that half the city's bakers belong to guilds that take unleavened personally. But that's for later. For now, it's just you, your crew, and a head full of hopes made from sourdough starter and pure delusion. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. You never know, maybe some other sleepy historian nearby is kneading imaginary dough with you right now. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The journey begins sometime around the late 10th century, when Norse warriors called Varangians in these parts have begun filtering into Byzantine service. The Eastern Roman Empire, tired of backstabbing local soldiers, recruits these tall, terrifying blonde men who apparently follow orders better than most nobles. Pull you, for reasons not entirely shared with the crew, are tagging along not to loot, but to learn how people bake things without everything tasting like charcoal. You first hear about Byzantine bread in a drunken tale shared by a Danish trader who claims Constantinople has more ovens than cows. That sounds fake, but it plants a seed. After all, back home in Norway, your breads are mostly dense, black, and eaten to survive, not enjoy. A dream grows. What if you could bake something soft, something round, something with just the faintest touch of sesame on top? So you pack your things to cloaks, one iron knife, and a tightly sealed pouch of dried sourdoughs, starter your grandmother passed down, allegedly touched by Odin himself. Your friends laugh. You're bringing yeast. One mocks, you nod solemnly, and honey, you add. That shuts them up. The journey south is miserable. Your boots rot. Someone vomits into the water barrel. You survive on dried fish and so stiff it chips a tooth. At one point, your yeast pouch nearly blows overboard during a storm. You lash it to your chest like a baby. Historians still argue whether small, independent Viking adventurers like you really made it to Constantinople with specific trade ideas, or whether such tales are exaggerations, born from Saga embellishments. But the Varangian presence was undeniably real. They stood as imperial guards, served in palace processions, and often left graffiti on the Hagia Sophia's walls. Whether one of them dreamed of gluten experiments remains delightfully debatable. Eventually, through sweat, cursing, and a healthy dose of dumb luck, you arrive. Constantinople, the queen of cities, a walled jewel ringed in sea, bristling with towers, and filled with noises no northern ears ready for. You gape at the sprawling markets, where oxen haul carts piled with spices you can't pronounce. You smell cinnamon, roasting lamb, and something faintly yeasty. It is both heaven and deeply threatening. Your first steps through the Forum of Constantine feel like wandering into a dream that forgot to invite your kind. People stare. You're sweaty, massive, and clearly not from around here. You try asking someone where the bakers are and receive directions to a fishmonger. You try again, get offered an eel, progress of a sort. You don't speak Greek yet, but bread, you hope, is a language all its own. You wander the markets, the courtyards, the cramped back alleys, watching how people handle dough, where they buy their flour, which ovens are wood-fired, and which are suspiciously glowing with magic-looking coals. One bakery catches your eye, a crowded little place near the Golden Horn, where people line up early for a thin, flat disc of bread sprinkled with seeds and salt. Peas it. It is crispy, chewy, and perfect. You cry a little dot, and then you get an idea. What if you could make that, but better, add a northern twist? A fluffier bite, maybe some fermented temps, and a touch of ash-baked crust. You'd need a place, a license, probably a guard who doesn't ask questions. But mostly, you'd need someone to believe that a Viking could, in fact, bake. That night, you sit in a rented room above a tavern and sketch your dream into the condensation on a cracked window pane. Bakery, a real one, not pillaging, not guarding, just honest crust, far below. The city doesn't care. The priests chant, the merchants haggle, the pigeons sleep. But in the dark, your dream takes root like a loaf just starting to rise. You wake to a humid morning in Constantinople, your linen shirt clinging to your back, and your dream still sticky in your chest. The tavern smells like spilled wine, damp wood, and something close to boiled cabbage. It's a far cry from the cold brine air of Norway, but it'll have to do. You step out into the waking city, down crooked stone steps, past a groaning donkey, and into a world that smells almost edible. The streets are already busy vendors shouting, carts clattering, stray cats slinking between barrels like furry shadows. But the dominant smell above the fish, the sweat, and the incense is bread, toasted, warm, yeasty bread. You follow it like a moth to fire, weaving through crowds that seem determined to walk directly into your chest. You reach a tiny open-air bakery just as the first round of loaves comes out of the stone oven. They're flat and golden, dusted with sesame and soft in the center. Simmet someone murmurs nearby. You remember that name, a bread you once tried in a port town far to the west. You reach for one, but the baker glares at you until you drop a bronze coin onto the chipped counter. Worth it. You sink your teeth into the crust and feel the dough pull back gently, just enough resistance to make you pause. It's good, very good, and now you're mad, because you want to make this dough improve it, and you don't even have a kitchen. The truth is, Constantinople is a city built not just on gold or war or icons, but on bread. The state controls grain imports. The emperor literally uses food distribution to keep people from rioting. Bread riots are a thing here common enough to have their own name. The unknown, the state grain supply, is managed with terrifying efficiency. And most citizens rely on subsidized wheat to survive. Historians still argue whether the city's control over grain was more about politics or just practical urban planning. Either way, bread equals power, which means anyone who wants to bake for a living has to get very, very cozy with bureaucracy. But you're not there yet. First, you need income. And unless someone suddenly starts paying foreigners to knead dough in public, you'll have to try something less crusty. That's when you hear whispers about the Varangian Guard. They're hiring. Again, seems like the court always needs fresh, tall people with swords and no strong opinions. And you're tall, well-armed, and not especially known for your conversational Greek. You sign up after only a few confused conversations and a lot of gesturing. Your name is mangled into something vaguely pronounceable, and just like that, you're a guard, a mercenary in shining bronze, or, more accurately, in badly dented bronze and a sweat-soaked tunic. The Varangian Guard is no joke. These are elite troops, mostly Norse. Some Anglo-Saxons hired to protect the emperor and serve as enforcers in sticky political situations. They're famously loyal, partly because they're paid well, partly because they're too far from home to get involved in local drama. You're just here to save up enough coins to open a bakery and maybe buy some cardamom. Your days are suddenly filled with drills, patrolling palace corridors, and standing very still, while eunuchs scurry past with scrolls and food trays. At night, though, you dream of dough. You sketch ideas into the dust on your shield. You think about crusts when others think about conquests. And that, of course, makes you deeply weird among the other guards. One night, during a late shift, you lean on your spear and ask a fellow guard what kind of bread they miss from home. He blinks, says something about oatcakes, and punches you in the arm. You get the message. Still, the idea festers. Maybe you can practice somewhere quiet, somewhere no one minds a little smoke, and that's how you end up converting the storage room behind the barracks into a secret proto-bakery. It's filled with amphorae, dried lentils, moldy grain sacks, and spiders the size of walnuts. But it has a stone hearth and a door that locks, and really, that's all you need. You steal firewood from the bathhouse and flour from the mess. You experiment a lot. Most of your early bakes are terrifying. One loaf resembles a helmet. Another fuses to the amphora and takes an hour to chip out. But occasionally, something works. Something rises. And when you finally get a dense, slightly tangy sourdough to hold its shape, you nearly cry into it. You begin feeding the better results to fellow guards. At first, they laugh. Then they chew. Then they demand more. One even suggests you open a stall. You tell him that's the plan. He laughs again. Good luck, he says. The Bakers' Guild will eat you alive, or at least overcharge you for yeast. The truth is, you're starting to learn things about Byzantine bread you never expected. Like how different neighborhoods prefer different loaves, how there are street hawkers who carry fresh bread on their heads, and how at least 3 bakers claim to be the emperor's official crumb supplier. You're also learning to love the city, for all its chaos and noise and fishy smells. There's something comforting in its rhythm. People here don't just eat to survive. They eat with joy, with flair, with ceremony. Even bread, the most humble of foods, gets dressed up with honey, herbs, and sesame. You want in, but dreams are slow to rise. For now, you guard a hall, polish your spear, and sneak off when you can to fire up your secret oven and shape your ambitions by hand. And as the city bell tolls for the midday prayer, you wipe flour from your face, toss a half-burned loaf to a passing dog, and whisper to the sky, soon. You're crouched in a storeroom again, watching dough rise with the intensity of a priest reading omens in chicken guts. The crust is cracking just a little at the edges, golden like the roof tiles of Hagia Sophia, and the smell heavens. The smell could probably cause a minor religious awakening in the alley. You've made a honey thyme flatbread that doesn't just taste good, feels like something someone in a silk robe would pay extra for. You've gone from failed flour bombs to respectable bread, and now your fingers itched to sell. But remember that offhand comment about the Bakers' Guild. Yeah, that wasn't a joke. In Constantinople, almost every profession is regulated by a syndesmos, a guild that controls pricing, training, licenses, and basically whether or not you're allowed to exist. Bakers are no exception. If you want to sell a single roll, even from a crooked basket on a side street, you'll need approval from the Guild of Artipois, the masters of the crumb. Historians still argue whether these guilds were more protective collectives or glorified mafias with bread peel-shaped batons. Either way, you don't want to mess with them. So now you've got a problem. You're a soldier, a foreigner, and an unlicensed baker. That's 3 strikes, but you're also stubborn. And you've heard whispers, quiet rumors that sometimes the guilds turn a blind eye if you go through alternative routes, so naturally you end up talking to a monk. His name is Matthias, and he's the kind of man who looks like he smells faintly of incense and knows exactly how many grapes are in a sacred offering. You meet him during a guard shift at a monastery gate. He's trying to haul a sack of barley flour twice his size, and you, being a deeply decent muscle mountain, help him carry it inside. One grateful chat later, he mentions that the monks bake bread for the poor every week. You mention you know how to knead. He raises an eyebrow. Next thing you know, you're baking on holy ground. The monastery oven is ancient cracked stone, still warm from centuries of use. Matthews watches as you shape loaves into unfamiliar designs, fold in herbs, lace the tops with olive oil. He nods, says nothing. Then, as the first batch cools, he picks one up, breaks it open, and whispers, "This might actually make people believe in God again." Your bread becomes a quiet miracle among the poor. You're not paid, but you don't need to be. Flour, less free. The ovens are open, and you get to experiment without fear of guild thugs turning up with burnt rolling pins. Your reputation begins to spread slowly, word by warm mouth. A sailor mentions the foreign flower mage in the monastery. A fishwife swears the crust healed her hangover. A noblewoman, disguised in a veil, samples your rosemary rings and leaves you a gold coin wrapped in silk. And then, of course, the guild finds out. It happens on a damp morning. You arrive at the monastery to find the door chained shut and a note pinned with a crooked nail. It's written in furious Greek, but the gist is clear. Cease, or be fined into oblivion. Matthews frowns, but shrugs. Perhaps God bakes elsewhere now, you sigh. You don't blame him. Crossing the guild means crossing the grain quotas, tax collectors, and, possibly, the emperor himself. So, you pivot. Again, if you can't bake publicly, you'll do it privately. Underground, whispered. You become the bread equivalent of a speakeasy loaves traded in alleys. Buns passed under cloaks, sweet rolls hidden in scroll satchels. You sell to scribes, sailors, even a couple of suspiciously rich-looking children who keep saying your anise muffins taste better than the patriarch's. You also begin to learn the nuances of Byzantine baking. There's artos, the religious bread served at liturgy. There's laganon, a proto-pasta flatbread, often flavored with herbs. There are honey cakes shaped like fish. And somewhere between loaves, you start developing a new idea hybrid. A bread that's hearty like a Norse rye, but kissed with Byzantine flavors. Honey, orange blossom, sesame, thyme, something that speaks in 2 languages. Like you. Meanwhile, back in the barracks, things grow awkward. Your gear smells faintly of cinnamon. You're late for drills, and one night, your commanding officer pulls you aside and says, "We didn't hire you to butter buns." So, naturally, you lie. You say you've stopped. You smile, nod, and then keep right on baking. It's becoming harder to hide. You need a space, a legal one. But renting one would draw attention. And you're still not welcome in the guild. That's when a regular customer bookbinder with ink on his nose and a chronic muffin addiction gives you a lead. There's a storage alcove in the scriptorium no one uses. He mutters one day, mouth full of cinnamon bread, put warm, has a chimney. And the monks down there are half deaf anyway. You check it out. He's right. The room is dusty, but it's solid. You scrape together every coin you've made, buy a second-hand oven from a retiring potter, and quietly begin renovations. You bribe a scribe to bring in firewood. You charm a wine merchant into giving you barrels to sit on. And just like that, you have a space. You call it Dios. After a constellation you saw once while drunk on pomegranate wine. No sign, no grand opening. Just a tap on the door and the right phrase. Do you need peace? Inside, there's warmth, a flickering fire, the smell of citrus peel and baking crust. And you, flower-streaked and smiling, sliding trays from the heat with a wooden peel like a holy relic. You're still breaking rules, but you're also breaking bread. And in a city where faith and food walk hand in hand, that's starting to matter. Your bakery is now technically a broom closet with delusions of grandeur, but it's breathing, it's alive. Scorpios, Sura, off the books. Bacchali, hearth, getting a reputation. Not loud, not flashy, just persistent. Like a warm whisper in winter, passed from hand to hand, with a few breadcrumbs tucked in sleeves. You've become a minor legend among those who appreciate the quiet rebellion of a good crust. Your regulars include eunuchs from the palace kitchens, tired monks with sugar cravings, and one elderly woman who claims her late husband shows up in her dreams specifically for your barley biscuits. She brings you little coins wrapped in cloth and always leaves humming hymns. But of course, the walls have ears in Byzantium. That's practically their whole job. One evening, you're testing a new recipe dough braided with goat cheese and sesame when a shadow crosses your doorway. You expect another secret sweet tooth. Instead, it's a man in deep blue robes, heavy with medals and embroidered edges. His beard is trimmed with the precision of a stonemason, and his eyes scan the room like a tax ledger. You freeze, half kneading, and try not to panic. He steps in. "I heard," he says, drawing a slow breath. "There was a Norseman baking bread illegally beneath the Gospels. You consider denying it. You really do. But then he reaches for a still warm loaf, tears off a piece, chews, and closes his eyes. Hymns criminally good. Turns out he's not here to arrest you. His name is Constantinos, and he works for a bureaucrat who works for another bureaucrat, who sometimes caters meetings at the emperor's court. He's heard of you through the grapevine, or rather, the grape tart, and he's here with a proposal. You bake quietly for certain events, private dinners, courtyard gatherings, the kinds of things where no one wants to admit they hired a foreigner with a flower fetish. In return, I smooth things with the guild, discreetly. You blink. He hands you a pouch of silver. Just say yes. You say yes. So now, in addition to your secret bakery hours, you're baking elite behind the curtain loaves for Byzantine high society. You're flown well, escorted to marble courtyards to set up rustic bread carts disguised under linen cloths. You hand out olive-studded focaccia to retired generals. You serve citrus rose cakes to the niece of some obscure bishop with opinions about spelt. One night, someone tells you the Empress herself had your honey lavender knots at a garden party. and didn't spit them out, which, in elite terms, is basically a standing ovation. You're not just surviving, you're thriving. But success comes with shadows. Guild whispers grow louder. Some say a foreigner is stealing coins. Others say you're a heretic using northern pagan magic to enchant dough. One baker insists you put charms in your crusts. You did once hide fennel seeds in a loaf, but that's just culinary mischief, not witchcraft. And now there are strange visitors. One man, cloaked in plain wool, shows up asking too many questions about your flour suppliers. Another spends a little too long examining your oven. A third claims to be writing a song about underground bakers who defy empires, which is very flattering but deeply inconvenient. You start baking at night again, just in case. Meanwhile, your own recipe book begins to grow mentally, at least. You've stopped copying recipes from anyone else. Now you just invent. You try rice flour from a Persian merchant and mix it with egg yolks to create a chewy bread that makes your regulars weep. You soak dates in wine for 3 days and blend them into a walnut loaf that vanishes before it cools. You discover that if you slap a little seawater into your sourdough mix, it crisps up like a dream and tastes faintly of adventure. And yet, as your baking evolves, so does your sense of alienation. The Varangian barracks feel more foreign now. They eat their rations cold, drink their beer warm, and joke about your bread obsession like it's a passing illness. One of them calls you the flour ghost. Another throws a stale crust at your back and laughs. You laugh too, but it doesn't quite reach your stomach. Historians still argue whether Norse mercenaries in Byzantium ever truly integrated, or if they remained eternal outsiders trusted with swords, but not with hearts. You feel that question, by in your bones every night, when you light the oven alone. But not all bonds break. You start teaching a few people quietly. A runaway apprentice from the guild, by a kitchen girl with burns on her fingers and dreams in her eyes. An older monk who says he once baked for an emperor and misses the feel of needing more than prayer. They become your circle, your flower family. You learn, slowly, that bread is more than sustenance. It's memory, it's ritual, it's resistance. In Byzantium, where words are weighed like gold and loyalties shift like the tides, bread is honest. If it's good, it stays. If it's bad, it molds Dot and yours. Well, never makes it to the mold stage. Still, you can't ignore the growing pressure. A scribbled threat left near your oven. A fine you weren't supposed to receive. A letter unsigned, warning you to knead carefully. You start sleeping in shifts, and then one morning, your flour sack is slashed open. Your mixing bowl smashed. Your baking peels gone. You sit on the floor, staring at the wreckage, while the smell of stale sesame hangs in the air like a ghost. You breathe, then you clean. Then, because you're stubborn to a fault, you start again. Only now, you're angry, and you're thinking, maybe, it's time to go legit. You're still scraping sesame seeds out of the stone floor, when the idea fully formed. Make the bakery legal. Bring it out of the shadows. Register it. Name it. Hang up a sign like a normal business. In theory, it's simple. In Byzantium, however, simplicity is a luxury. No one can afford it, especially not you, a Norseman with a whisk and a questionable visa status. To become a licensed baker, you need permission from the local food guild. The artist symbiotes, literally, the bread companions. Cute name, terrifying people. Think of them as a combination of a labor union, a culinary cult, and a bureaucracy with a mean sense of humor. You approach their headquarters, a squat building near the fish market, and immediately regret everything. It smells like brine and yeast and anxiety. Inside, dozens of bakers argue over flour weights and oven bricks, while a clerk records complaints with the soulless focus of someone whose dreams died in paperwork. You queue, you shuffle, you sweat. When your turn comes, the clerk eyes your application, then eyes you. Foreign. She asks. You nod. Varangian. You nod again. Baker. You smile. She sighs so deeply it might have echoed in Constantinople's sewer. Buell need for witness signatures. One from a guild member in good standing. One from a religious authority. One from a magistrate. And one from a she pauses, reading the scroll like it's a riddle, neighbor. You thank her, though no part of you is thankful, and leave. For signatures should be easy, right? You begin with the magistrate. That's actually the easiest. You bake a spiced carrot loaf for his wife's name day celebration, and in return he scribbles something that probably says, "This guy won't poison anyone, I guess." You don't question it. Next, a religious figure. You visit a small church. On the outskirts, where the priest is known to enjoy a little barley pudding on the side, you show up with one, steaming and sweet. He blesses you with holy water and a sloppy signature. The neighbor, you rope in the monk from your makeshift team. He nods solemnly and writes his name in letters so loopy it looks like a decorative border. Now comes the hard part, the guild. You need someone on the inside, someone with pull, someone whose opinion actually matters. So naturally, you look for someone who dislikes the current leadership. Enter Melina. She's an old, sharp-headed baker with hands like leather and a tongue like a whetstone. Her shop is tiny, but her influence is huge. She's been at odds with the guild chair for years, mostly because she insists cinnamon should be used liberally and refuses to water down her dough for profit margins. She agrees to meet you after hearing about your fennel crust fiasco. "I hate you already," she says, "but I hate them more. Let's make it interesting." She tastes your bread, chews slowly, nods. "You've got potential," she mutters, "but your knots are ugly." She signs anyway, and just like that, you've got the four. You march back to the guild office, full of defiance and a tiny bit of indigestion that carrot loaf was dense. The clerk stares at your scroll like you just handed her a dead fish. Then she shrugs and stamps it. "You're conditionally approved," she says, voice flat. "Inspection pending." And that's when you learn about Lysandros. Lysandros, the inspector, guild enforcer, certified oven snob. A man who once rejected a license because someone used too much salt in a ceremonial loaf. He's known for sudden visits, dramatic pauses, and being perpetually unimpressed. You clean everything. You scrub the hearthstones. You polish your mixing bowls until they reflect your worried face. You even fluff the flour sacks like they're pillows at a royal inn. Lysandros arrives at dawn, wearing all black. He carries beer, a clipboard, and the grim aura of a man who hasn't smiled since the fall of Rome. He sniffs, he pokes, he mutters. He finds a sesame seed under your kneading table and raises an eyebrow like it's a murder weapon. You offer him tea. He declines. You offer bread. He takes a piece of walnut honey loaf, chews, pauses, then frowns dramatically. You used citrus in this, he states. You nod. He nods back, bold, then walks out without another word. You spend the next 3 days wondering if bold was good or bad or sarcastic. Eventually, a letter arrives. Approved, conditional, review in 6 months. You don't celebrate. You collapse. You're legal now, technically. You can hang a sign. You can advertise, though not too loudly. You even get a small plaque from the guild that looks suspiciously like it was repurposed from a fishmonger's stand. So you name the place. You call it Nordbrad, a mix of your old tongue and your new craft. The sign is simple, a loaf and an axe crossed like allies. You hang it proudly above the door. And just like that, you're no longer a whisper in the alley. You're a real bakery. Historians still argue whether foreign artisans ever truly disrupted the Byzantine guild system or just existed within its cracks, tolerated but never embraced. You know where you stand, wedged somewhere between tolerated and barely legal cinnamon rogue. By your customers keep coming, your apprentices keep learning. And you keep baking, because now, finally, it feels like you belong. Even if the sesame still ends up under your fingernails, and somewhere in a marble room far above your pay grade, a noble woman tells her friends, you simply must try the barbarian's rye. It's utterly divine. You've arrived. With your sign hung and your license stamped, albeit conditionally, you begin settling into the delicate rhythm of running a bakery in one of the most complicated cities ever built. Byzantium is a creature, bell, of layers, of incense and oil, silk and shadow, marble palaces rubbing shoulders with goat-filled courtyards. Running a legal business here doesn't just mean baking good bread. It means surviving the Byzantine economy. And the Byzantine economy, in case you were wondering, is like a game of Tetris where all the pieces are curved and half of them are cursed. Every morning you rise before the city's noise begins, before the hawkers and the bellroomers, before the clash of armor from the barracks. You knead dough in near silence, shaping it into rounds and spirals, braided loaves and flat ones flecked with onion or date paste. The smells rise with the sun, warm yeast, toasting sesame smoke from the clay hearth. For a brief moment, you feel rich. Then the customers arrive. Your first is always the same, a street sweeper named Nico, who insists on paying with coins that smell suspiciously like fish. You don't ask why. His loyalty is worth a little cent confusion. Then come the students from the monastery, then the wives of dock workers, and eventually the upper crust, both metaphorically and literally. You start noticing patterns. Wheat prices go up after imperial feasts. Honey vanishes from the markets after wedding season. Almonds are suddenly rationed whenever a general returns from campaign and starts throwing banquets. Byzantium is a city of celebrations, but also of hoarding. You learn to buy early and hide well. One day, a tax collector enters your shop, all robes and smugness. He walks in like he owns your kneading board. Your foreign poop, he says, voice like vinegar. You nod. You sell food, he continues. You nod again. You're eligible for the non-native provisions merchant tax. Subsection C, paragraph 12. You blink. That's not a real thing, you mutter. He smiles. It is now. So you pay. Not because it's fair, but because it's easier than having your ovens confiscated. Byzantium runs on unofficial taxes, the way your loaves run on steam. You start budgeting not just for flour and oil, but for bribes, inspections, and the occasional holiday fee from the Imperial Guard. But it's not all bad. Your reputation spreads, and with it, opportunity. A scribe begins ordering ink rolls which, incidentally, help him chew less while copying manuscripts. A circus trainer swings by weekly for lion-friendly biscuits. Honey oat buns, he claims, calm the animals. You don't ask questions. You even gain a few noble clients, which is a double-edged sword. They pay in heavy gold coins, yes, but they also demand absurdities like saffron-crusted pretzels or dove-shaped flatbreads that must look thoughtful, but not too thoughtful. You oblige, because money talks. Sometimes it shouts, "Dot." One morning, you find a note slid under your door. It reads, "Theophilos likes the fig crust. Meet on the 10th day. No signature, no wax seal. Just a very confident note." You don't know who Theophilos is, but you assume he's either important or dangerous. Bov. Turns out he's the Emperor's cousin, and he wants a private tasting. Dot. You show up with your best hazelnut rounds, saffron-crackled barley cakes, cinnamon swirls so soft they nearly sigh in your hands. Theophilos is younger than you. Expect, with suspiciously clean fingernails and eyes that never stop calculating. He eats silently, then leans back. You're the barbarian baker. You nod, hoping that's not an insult. "I like what you're doing," he says. "It's provincial, but brave." You blink. He waves a jeweled hand. "Keep baking. You'll hear from me again." That's how you become unofficially semi-contracted by a branch of the imperial family. And with that, your life becomes even more chaotic. Because now you have to manage supply chains. You hire a local grain merchant named Orestes, who smells perpetually like overripe pears but knows every shady cellar from here to Galata. You send him with lists, scrolls, bribes stuffed in fish bellies. He always returns with exactly 92% of what you asked for. And usually a strange fruit you didn't. You also employ a stable boy, ex-stable boy named Milo, whose job is to carry your deliveries, swat pigeons away from your cooling racks, and spy on rival bakeries. Yes, rival bakeries. You discover there are 3 others within walking distance, each run by someone who either despises your foreign-kneading techniques or secretly wants to learn them. There's Demetrius, who runs a crustacean stall and has challenged you to a bake duel, no fewer than 4 times. You decline, mostly because you're not sure what that entails and suspect it involves flaming baguettes. Then there's Irene, whose baklava towers have literal bees circling them. You respect her hustle. And finally, Kairos, the quiet one, whose bread is just okay, but whose wife is a master of whisper campaigns. You learn this when half your customers start asking if your rye makes their teeth fall out. It doesn't. For the record, historians still argue whether economic competition in the Byzantine capital was as cutthroat as records suggest, or whether the most vicious rivalries were just glorified gossip. You know firsthand, the bakery business is war-fought, not with swords, but with sesame and salt to stay ahead. You innovate. You invent night bread, small rolls baked after sundown, sold at sunrise for workers heading to the shipyards. You add carob to your dough and call it noble dark. You start stamping your loaves with a tiny rune only you and your apprentices recognize. To prevent copycats, you become more than a baker. You become an economist, a negotiator, a logistics expert, part-time diplomat, and, on Tuesdays, a very reluctant pigeon wrangler. Running a bakery in Byzantium, as it turns out, means learning to survive 1,000 tiny crises before breakfast. But every now and then, when the oven glows just right, and your team is laughing and the scent of honey-crackled crust rises like incense, you remember why you started. Not for fame, not for money, but for that simple, fleeting moment when flour, fire, and time combined into something that makes people close their eyes when they taste it. You don't mean to get political. You're a baker, after all. Flour, water, yeast. Those are your languages. But in Byzantium, politics seeps into everything, even your sourdough. It begins innocently. A loaf ordered by a palace servant. Nothing fancy, just your standard phenolaced rye with the crust brushed in egg for shine. But it's delivered on a day when half the court is fasting, and someone, perhaps a jealous, prish perhaps a priest, with too much time claims you've violated a sacred dietary rule. You're summoned to explain. Not before a judge, no before a bureaucrat, whose eyebrows are more threatening than most swords, who you stand there, bespeckled apron and all, while he reads aloud from a parchment titled Liturgical Offenses and Misbaked Goods. You apologize profusely. You even offer him a cinnamon roll as a peace gesture. He eats it, then finds you. Anyway, from that day, you keep 2 sets of menus. One for ordinary customers, and one for days when a religious fast might be lurking around the corner. You also start dating your flour sacks and keeping records of which mill processed what grain. because the city occasionally accuses foreign merchants of tainting wheat with heretical practices. What heretical milling looks like, you don't know, but you're not risking it. The empire, you discover, is a beautiful monster robed in mosaics and scented with myrrh, but full of hidden jaws. To sell bread here is to sell it under a dozen eyes. Priests, merchants, guards, scribes, everyone watches. Some watch more than others. One day, you're approached by a man in a deep blue cloak. No name, no pleasantries. He walks in, buys a honey cake, and murmurs, "We think you're interesting." Then he leaves. 2 days later, you find a letter tucked under your grain sacks. It bears the imperial sealan, actual purple ribbon, and a drop of beeswax stamped with the double-headed eagle. You're pretty sure that's not something they hand out with lentil orders. The letter requests your presence at the palace kitchens, not for punishment, for consultation. And so, one morning, you're escorted past the bronze gates and up a marble stair that smells faintly of oranges and old incense. The kitchen is vast, more alchemy lab than cookhouse. Copper pots bubble with sauces you can't name. Chickens hang by their toes, waiting to be stuffed with pomegranates. One chef is painting squid ink on pastries like it's war paint. You're handed an apron and pointed toward a table. "We need bread," says a supervisor, "for a feast." You nod with subtlety, he adds, tapping his nose. Apparently, the emperor is trying to mend ties with a rival general by throwing a party so dazzling, so sensorially overwhelming, that everyone forgets the wars and backbend, as always, must play its role. You spend the next 12 hours shaping loaves into doves and olive branches, braiding dough to resemble laurel wreaths, and testing combinations of fig, rosemary, and almond that make even the palace cat purr. The feast is a success. You're not invited. Of course, wrong social class, but you hear about it the next day from 3 different sources. One says your bread made a general cry. Another claims someone tried to smuggle your date loaf out in their robe. The third just says, "Nice crust." From then on, you're a name. Not just in your neighborhood, but in the whispers between. Eunuchs and merchants, monks and midwives. The northern baker, they call you. The yeasted foreigner. Occasionally, the Viking with the soft buns, which you try not to take personally. Your success earns you more freedom and more enemies. Demetrius, remember him? The crustacean guy. He files a complaint accusing you of aromatic aggression, which is somehow a real charge under a law written in the reign of Constantine VII. You'll find, again, Irene, ever the queen of flakiness, suddenly releases a line. Pastries almost identical to yours, suspiciously so. Her apricot swirls even have the same double twist design. Begin labeling your trays more carefully and start using your rune stamp, again this time hidden in the base of each loaf. Kyros. Meanwhile, starts offering Nordic-style buns. His art. Not great, but still, you notice, historians still argue whether guilds in Byzantium enforced fair trade or simply protected monopolies. You know that enforcement is selective and usually depends on whose cousin holds which office. So you stay cautious. You bake, you smile, you bribe when necessary, and you invest in something critical. Apprentices. You take on 3. 1 from the islands, 1 from Armenia, and 1 unexpectedly from the Varangian Guard. Yes, that Varangian Guard. Turns out, even bodyguards like their crust fluffy. The guard's name is Eirik, and he's a quiet giant who treats dough like beet sacred. He can crack walnuts with his fingers, and also has a surprisingly delicate touch when shaping buns. When not baking, he keeps your storefront safe. 1 attempted robbery ends when he simply stares at the thief. The thief bursts into tears and leaves a note of apology along with 2 coins and half a plum. Business stabilizes. You upgrade your oven with a dome structure that keeps heat longer. You experiment with grape must and barley malt, creating what might be the world's first cake beer hybrid. It's an acquired taste, mostly acquired by Eirik. Evenings become peaceful again. You sit outside your shop, watching the sea glint orange in the dusk. You tear off a bit of still warm bread, eat it slowly, and let the wind brush the sweat from your brow. For a few brief weeks, you even forget you're not from here. But Byzantium never lets anyone forget. One morning, a new law is announced. All foreign merchants must undergo cultural purity checks. Whatever that means, you're not worried. Yet, you've been compliant. You've paid your dues sometimes twice. But deep down, you know that the city doesn't care how good your crust is if your accent's wrong. Still, for now, the ovens are warm. The bread is selling. And in this empire of marble and mystery, even a Viking can carve out a place 1 roll at a time. You don't sleep well the night before your cultural purity check. It's hard to relax when your fate is in the hands of bureaucrats who think cumin is suspicious and who measure foreignness with rulers dipped in paranoia. You wake up before dawn, flour already on your fingers by habit, and need a batch of morning loaves with more force than usual yaw. Dough might be the softest thing in Byzantium, but today you need it to absorb nerves. The notice instructs you to report to an office tucked behind the Hagia Sophia, where marble columns meet the smell of damp parchment. A clerk with ink-stained fingers and a haircut last seen on a Roman statue gestures you toward a bench. You wait and wait and wait some more when you're finally called in. You're surprised to find that your inquisitor isn't some terrifying imperial official, but a tiny, round man with glasses perched on his nose and a fig roll halfway to his mouth. He peers at you, chews thoughtfully, then gestures to a table. Name. He mumbles through crumbs. You tell him occupation. You sigh. Baker. He writes it down, pauses, then adds, foreign. You nod. From the north. He chews for another beat, then asks, do you use spices? You hesitate. Sometimes cinnamon, fennel, a little cardamom. He leans forward like you just confessed to poisoning a bishop. You're aware that cardamom is imported through Arab traders. Very aware, you say. I pay triple for it. Do your breads sing hymns? What? He waves it off. Just a rumor. The whole thing lasts 15 minutes. When it's over, he gives you a certificate stamped with wax ink and an unfortunate smudge of fig filling. You're officially deemed non-subversive Class A, which sounds like an insult but lets you keep baking. Back at the shop, your apprentices greet you with cautious optimism. Eirik offers you a mug of honeyed barley tea, which you suspect he brewed mainly to avoid baking alone. The next few weeks pass in a haze of relief and routine. Your customers return, including the cranky noble who claims you put too much joy into your crust, and the street kid who trades small pebbles for end pieces. Life, if not simple, at least falls back into rhythm. Then a messenger arrives. This one's in uniform, all navy and gold, with an emblem you recognize from your last palace visit. The Empress, he says, requests your presence. You try not to flinch at the word requests. You're escorted not to the palace kitchens this time, but to a sun-drenched garden with carved fountains and peacocks who look like they've unionized. The Empress herself sits on a bench with a scroll in one hand and a sesame cake, your sesame cake in the other dot. She gestures for you to sit. You do, very carefully. There's an awkward moment when your apron squeaks against the marble. I like your bread, she says without looking up. Thank you, Your Majesty. It's honest. She finally glances at you. Too much in this city isn't. You're not sure if that's a compliment or a warning. I want you to make something special, she continues. Something unique, a signature. You clear your throat. I have a cinnamon walnut plate that, no, she says, waving you off. Not for me, for the city, for Byzantium. You blink. You want a civic bread. Yes, she says, standing, something that captures who we are. You're foreign. You see us clearly. Bake us, and then she leaves. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine cultural commission or just a culinary prank played by a bored empress. Some records suggest she had a habit of giving strange tests to artists. One sculptor had to carve a statue of silence. Another was told to make a painting that smelled like the sea. You, however, take the job seriously. Back at the bakery, you sketch ideas with your apprentices. You list the things Byzantium means to you. Gold, incense, sea salt, suspicion, drama, warmth, spectacle, contradictions. You think of the city's domes, its processions, its labyrinthine alleys, its endless mix of cultures. Then you begin testing. The first loaf is dyed with saffron, shaped like a dome, and dusted with crushed pistachio. Oof! It collapses in the oven like a scandal. The second is laced with myrtle and orange peel, and glazed in rosewater. It tastes like a scented candle, a fancy one, but still, the third works. You use rye for strength, wheat for softness. You mix dates and fennel for the sweetness and kick, and a touch of olive oil for depth. You braid the dough into a spiral, mimicking the whirl of Constantinople's street processions. On top, You press in a pattern using the back of a coin, the emperor's face. Reversed and slightly wonky, but recognizable. It's not flashy. It doesn't sing hymns or glitter in torchlight, but it feels right. You send the first batch to the palace with a note, bread of the city. The empress replies the next morning, keep baking. And you do. Word spreads. Soon, people aren't just asking for bread. They're asking for the bread. The one that tastes like home. Even to people who've never left the city walls, tries to imitate it. But his version uses lentils and despair. Irene adds saffron, ruins the balance. Kairos doesn't even try. Your shop gets busier. Even the bureaucrats come by now under fake names to avoid suspicion of culinary bias. You name one of your cats after the empress. It seems polite still. Byzantium stays Byzantium. There's another law. This one says that all civic goods must pay a heritage tax. Grudgingly. But your bread keeps selling. And for the first time since you arrived, you feel not just tolerated, but accepted. Well, mostly .EIRIK starts calling you Becarios, the loafsmith, which is either affectionate or deeply insulting in Old Norse. You decide to take it as a compliment. You wake up one morning to find that someone has painted a mural on the side of your bakery. It's not very good. In fact, it's awful. The figures are lumpy, the colors are all wrong, and the loaves in the painting look more like bricks than bread. But the message, the message is clear. Across the top, in big, crooked Greek letters, bread of Byzantium. At first, you're horrified. It's not the unauthorized street art that bothers you after all. Your window once featured a chicken dance troupe that nobody asked for, but the sheer, undeniable permanence of it. It's a public claim, a bold, sloppy, wildly inaccurate proclamation that you, a northern outsider with suspiciously long braids and a thing for fennel, are now part of the civic identity. By noon, people are taking turns posing next to it. One man kisses the wall. A child draws an even worse loaf on top of the original one. It becomes a local landmark overnight. Someone tries to chip the mural off for personal safekeeping, which is flattering if also illegal. You sigh, wipe flour on your tunic, and go back inside. There's dough to shape that week. A scholar named Petros stops by. He's tall, smells faintly of goatskin parchment, and wears the expression of someone who once got into an argument with a sundial and lost. He orders one of your civic loaves, banned, stands there chewing in absolute silence for a full minute. Then, abruptly, he announces, "This bread is inherently rhetorical." You blink. "What?" "It speaks," he says, gesturing with a half-eaten slice. "It reflects our contradictions, soft interior, crusty exterior, foreign origins, native popularity, semi-legible coin press. This is post-technoclastic carbohydrate philosophy. Thank you. Historians will argue about this," he says, wiping his fingers on your doorframe. "Bore centuries." And he's right, in a way. There's something about bread in Byzantium that goes beyond food. It's ritual, it's memory, it's politics baked golden brown. Byzantine court records show that bread was once used to convey secret messages, scrolls baked into hollow loaves, exchanged under tables during negotiations. There's even a theory that one seditious baker once shaped his rolls into miniature busts of an unpopular emperor, just so patrons could bite his head off in solidarity. Your own bread doesn't carry hidden scrolls or edible emperors, but it carries a message of its own. This place is messy, layered, contradictory, and yes, deeply delicious. The shop becomes a melting pot of the city itself. On any given morning, you serve merchants from Alexandria, tailors from the Jewish quarter, Armenian scribes, Persian travelers, and local grandmothers who pat your face and tell you you're still too thin. One of them pinches your cheek so hard you drop a tray of biscuits. You consider hiring more help. Eirik suggests a cousin. You politely decline. His last cousin tried to ferment cabbage in the flour bin. Then there's the letter . It arrives in a silk envelope sealed with imperial gold. It smells faintly of rosewater and ambition. You open it slowly, already sensing that nothing good comes in envelopes like these. It's from a dignitary named Lord Manuel, head of urban harmony and grain stability. That's a real title, apparently. The letter is 3 pages long, filled with decorative flourishes and words like synergy and mutual interest. But you boil it down to one line. We'd like to franchise your bakery. You reread it. Then again, franchising. In Byzantium, you imagine 100 identical shops, all bearing your name, all run by strangers. Your bread sold in marble stalls beside perfumes, silks, and caged parrots. The Beccario's loaf turned into a brand, a trend. You don't sleep well that night. You dream of your sourdoughs wearing tiny togas, parading across maps and losing their flavor to bureaucracy. In the morning, you send a polite decline. 3 days later, inspectors show up. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe the harmony and grain folks aren't used to hearing no. They measure your oven, check your scales, count your egg stock. One inspector taps the floor suspiciously, as if you're hiding contraband yeast under the tiles. Another asks to see your spice log. You remain calm. Mostly they leave without issuing a fine. But your bread that day is saltier than usual. Later that week, the Empress returns. This time without an entourage, without a carriage, without ceremony. She just walks in, pulls up a stool, and eats a slice. She chews thoughtfully. Then, looking up, says, "They're trying to make you theirs." You nod. You felt it. The way success is twisted into control. The way celebrated can slowly become appropriated. She sets the crust down gently. You don't have to let them. Easier said than done, you reply. True. She agrees. But you're not alone. Byzantium is many things. You're one of them now. They can't erase you without erasing the flavor. You stare at her for a moment. Then you smile. Not because everything is solved, but because in a city where identity is often more performance than truth, you've somehow found yours baked into something real. Over the next month, you teach a class, just one, open to any one child, elder, noble, merchant. You charge a single coin, or a good story, whichever they have. You walk them through dough, heat, timing, patience. Some are terrible at it. One man keeps trying to juggle his roles, but others, they learn, they listen, they bake. One boy makes a flat, dense, underproofed disaster, and grins with such joy that you name it urban diplomacy bread. It catches on with diplomats for some reason. A nun adds lavender to hers. A retired soldier goes full chili pepper by Byzantium in flower form. And you keep baking, because despite the politics, the pressure, the paint murals, and the rogue art historians, nothing feels quite as real as the smell of warm bread and the sound of laughter over a shared loaf. You're elbow deep in dough when the earthquake hits. It starts as a low hum, the kind that makes plates tremble and pigeons shuffle uneasily on the roof. At first, you think it's a passing cart, those heavy ones that clatter along with 1,000 hooves and an ox too ambitious for its size. But then the jars rattle, the flour sack tips, and your carefully rising rye loaf your pride and joy. For the die zags, in the middle like a deflated pillow, you freeze. The ground ripples beneath you. Tiles shake loose from the ceiling. A rack of cooling pastries slides off the counter and shatters on the floor in a sticky, cinnamon-laced explosion. You duck beneath the workbench as a pot crashes behind you, and all you can think is, not the starter jar. Please, not the starter jar. After what feels like an hour but is probably just 20 seconds, the tremor stops. Silence follows heavy, stunned, broken only by the wheezing sigh of a broken oven vent. You emerge cautiously, blinking through flour, dust, and powdered sugar. Outside, chaos. People stumble through the streets. A minaret leans at an uncomfortable angle. Pigeons take frantic flight in a cyclone of feathers. Somewhere, a camel brays indignantly, and you gather the remains of your pastries, sweep the broken dishes, and light the oven back up, because you're a baker. And when the world shakes, someone still has to feed it later that day. A neighbor from 3 doors down, an old man with a beard that starts conversations before he dozzlings through your window and says, "Still open." You nod. "Good," he says, "because my grandson won't stop crying until he gets your barley cakes." That night, you give away more than you sell. Parents bring frightened children. Shopkeepers huddle with bruised knees. One woman carries her cat like a sack of potatoes. They all eat, and for a brief moment, the world feels stable again. Here's a fact. Byzantium, perched on fault lines, both literal and political, suffered frequent earthquakes. Some were minor, others devastating. In the 9th century, an earthquake cracked the great sea walls. In 557, a quake was so fierce it knocked over part of Hagia Sophia's dome, which you can agree is probably worse than losing a cinnamon twist. Historians still argue whether the urban design of Constantinople adapted because of these quakes or in spite of them. Some say the narrow streets made evacuations harder. Others argue the densely packed architecture somehow absorbed shock better than open plazas. All you know is that today, the bread held dot in the days following the tremor. A quiet camaraderie settles over the neighborhood. People smile more. They share water. Someone leaves a basket of oranges at your door. Another neighbor brings fresh eggs without asking for trade. EIRIK returns from the docks with a new scar and a goose under his arm. Traded my left eyebrow for it, he claims. You don't ask questions. And then there's the boy. You first. Notice him loitering near the back door, skinny and fast-footed. At first, you think he's trying to steal, but when you catch him, he looks up, surprised and more hungry than guilty. You hand him a roll. He devours it in 2 bites, then runs off without a word. The next day, he returns. This time, he offers a cracked tile in return. The day after that, a handful of figs. You never learn his name, but he becomes your unofficial delivery assistant, racing through the streets, with fresh loaves tied in a cloth satchel, shouting things like crust for peace, and don't drop the sourdough. He has a gap-toothed grin and the energy of 12 ferrets. One evening, he scribbles a crooked map on the wall behind your oven. It's terrible. Mountains are triangles. The sea looks like spilled ink, and your bakery is marked with a giant smiling loaf, but it becomes your symbol, your quiet badge of resilience. Word spreads of how you stayed open, how your walls didn't crack, how your cinnamon rolls helped 3 people stop crying, and 1 couple decide not to divorce. You don't correct any of it, because in Byzantium, perception often becomes history. The scholar Petros visits again, this time dragging 2 students behind him. They argue over the political implications of your bread-to-child ratio. One of them sketches your cracked tile wall and mumbles something about post-seismic semiotics. You just nod and hand them muffins. There's a quirky little theory floating around. You hear it one night over a tavern meal that claims Byzantium's best bakers were protected by household spirits. Invisible guardians who shielded flour bins and guided the needing hand in times of trouble. Historians, of course, debate the origins of this. Some trace it back to Roman lares. Others claim it's a misinterpretation of St. Polycarp's midnight snack visions. You don't know about spirits, but you do know your sourdough starter survived, and that's close enough to divine intervention. As repairs begin across the city, the bakery becomes a kind of meeting point. Workers gather there before dawn. Artists sketch plans in the corners. Musicians rehearse songs about shaking walls and brave bread men. Someone tries to name a dance after your rye loaf. It's not good. Too many elbows. One afternoon, the Empress returns. She doesn't say much, just walks in, takes a seat, and waits. You serve the barley cake with extra honey. She takes 1 bite, then sets down a small scroll. It's a decree officially naming your bakery a place of cultural and emotional sustenance during calamity. You stare. That's a lot of syllables. You manage. She smiles. You earned every one. You hang the decree crookedly above your oven, because it's warm there. And slightly ironic, in Byzantium, nothing ever stays still. Not the politics, not the land, not the stories. But somewhere in that shifting chaos, your little bakery holds fast, and you keep baking. Through the tremors, through the crowds, through the endless debates over whether rye is superior to barley. You're not just feeding people anymore. You're part of the city's rhythm now. Its pulse, its crusty, golden heartbeat. The mornings start earlier now. Not because you sleep less, though, let's be honest. You've forgotten what a full night's sleep even feels like, but because the line outside your bakery starts forming before sunrise. You open the shutters to find a fisherman, a nun, two teenagers arguing about whose turn it is to buy breakfast, and a dog who refuses to leave without a crust, and they're all waiting for you. You, the Viking baker who somehow became a neighborhood legend. It's gotten to the point where one of your customers brings a lute and plays while folks wait. He only knows 4 chords and insists on singing a tragic ballad about a pigeon lost at sea. But nobody has the heart to ask him to stop. You let him play because, well, Byzantium is nothing if not dramatic. One afternoon, a visiting Persian merchant strolls in. He takes one sniff of your honey flatbread and immediately offers to buy your entire recipe collection. "Name your price," he says, fanning himself with gold-trimmed gloves. You just hand him a slice. He takes one bite, closes his eyes, and says, "My ancestors are weeping." Later, you learn he wrote a poem about it, in 3 languages. But despite the fanfare, despite the unexpected fame, not everything is rising as smoothly as your dough. You've started to notice something troubling: flour shortages. It starts small, just a missed delivery here, a late cart there. But soon it becomes clear that supplies aren't reaching the city like they used to. The grain ships that should be gliding in from Egypt and Anatolia are delayed, sometimes by weeks. Historians still argue whether this particular disruption in grain flow during the 10th century was due to pirate blockades, imperial redirection of resources, or bureaucratic gridlock over new trade taxes. You just know your pantry is thinning out faster than your patience. You try substitutes: barley instead of wheat, lentil flour, ground chestnut, each one slightly off. The regulars still eat it, but they joke about needing stronger jaws. One old woman claims your lentil loaf gave her a vision of the Holy Spirit wearing a baker's hat. You don't know if she's joking. You send Eric out again, this time with clearer instructions. Don't trade anything you're not prepared to never see again. And absolutely no more geese. He comes back with flour, yes, but also a goat. You don't ask Dot, meanwhile. You get a visit from an imperial tax inspector. You know this because he announces himself like a man expecting trumpets, dressed in enough silk to curtain a theater. He taps a scroll against your countertop and asks about declared incomes versus recorded outflows. You blink. He repeats himself, slower this time, as if the problem is your grasp of Greek and not the fact that you're covered in apricot glaze and trying to coax a stubborn oven door into staying shut. Eventually, he pokes around, sniffs a few loaves, and writes something down in a tiny notebook that seems to mock you with every quill scratch dot. You think you're in trouble, but 2 days later, you receive a note. Not a fine, but a commendation. Apparently, you've been named a model of civic resilience and culinary morale. Again with the titles. Still, it comes with a little medallion shaped like a loaf of bread. You wear it once. Eirik says it makes you look like a saint of sandwiches. You never wear it again. As autumn creeps in, the mood shifts. The air grows crisper, and the smell of wood smoke replaces the city's usual haze of brine and incense. You start baking with spices, cinnamon, clove, nutmeg, expensive things you trade for with stories and favors rather than coins. You invent something new, honey-spiced rolls with crushed walnuts. You don't even name them, but within a week people are calling them Byzantine pillows. One man proposes to his girlfriend with one. She says yes. You attend their wedding. Standing in the back with a linen apron and a smudge of flour on your cheek, someone gives you a rose. You dry it and hang it above the oven. But not everything warms with the season. One night, your oven chimney chokes. Smoke fills the bakery, thick and fast. You rush to douse the embers, dragging buckets of water from the courtyard. Well, Eirik helps. So does the fig boy and 3 neighbors with terrible aim. You save the bakery, barely, but the oven suffers. Its stones crack. The heat won't hold. You stare at it the next morning, unsure what to do. A crowd gathers outside, confused. You open the shutters anyway. And then, like magic, the old woman with Holy Spirit dreams appears. She points at the chimney, squints, and says, "You need a mason." You nod. "Not just any mason," she says. "You need Lacus. No last name. Just Lacus." You find him 3 streets down, asleep under a cart with a cat curled on his chest. He smells of smoke and something spicy, but when you explain your problem, he sits up, stretches, and says, "Ovens are like hearts. They crack when they're tired, but they still beat if you know how to listen." You're not sure whether to be moved or concerned. 3 days later, your oven is not only fixed but better. It glows a steady orange, burns cleaner, and holds heat like a secret. You bake all night to test it. The bread is flawless. You make double batches of everything. Fill the windows, line the counters, pile the baskets high. And when dawn breaks, the scent of cinnamon, honey, and fresh stone-baked crust drifts across the city like incense from a temple. They come in waves. Tired workers, students skipping lectures, priests, scribes, sailors, beggars, even the tax inspector. He doesn't say a word, just eats, smiles, and leaves a silver coin stamped with the emperor's face. You toss it into a jar labeled in case of pigeon uprising. Because if Byzantium has taught you anything, it's to always expect the absurd. But it's also taught you something else. Resilience isn't loud. It isn't always dramatic or glorious. Sometimes it's just a man from the north, in an unfamiliar land, making bread that holds together when the world DOESN. Single quotes, too. So here you are again, in your little bakery tucked between a scroll shop and a notary's office. The sun barely stretching over the tiled roofs of Constantinople, casting long, sleepy shadows across your flour-dusted floor. You yawn, stretch, and wonder, somewhat philosophically, how a Viking war axe could ever feel lighter than a full sack of grain. Spoiler, it didn't. You just didn't care back then now. Lifting that sack feels like dragging the weight of the Roman Empire's bureaucracy itself. Still, you hoist it, because that's what you do. You're not just a baker anymore. You're a part of this strange machine of a Citian odd, cinnamon-scented cog in the ever-turning Byzantine wheel. You open shop with your usual routine. Check the oven, taste the dough, chase the goat out. Buy of the storeroom, yes, he's still around. And then adjust the little wooden sign that Eric carved, which reads rather proudly, Valbrand's Bread and Whimsy. You didn't approve the name, but by the time you noticed, the customers already loved it. Too late now. The mornings are busy, always. You've taken to hiring a local girl named Amara. She's quick, sharper than a dagger tip, and can count. Change faster than you can blink. You suspect she's secretly running the whole operation and just lets you believe you're in charge. Today, she gives you a look. You know that look. It means something's up. What now? You ask, mid-roll shaping dot. She points out the window, and there, striding toward your shop like he owns not just the road but time itself, is a man in silk robes the color of new ink. His beard is perfectly curled, and behind him trail 3 scribes, a eunuch with a clipboard, and of course a pigeon. You've been summoned, Amara says, deadpan. Summoned? You repeat, as if that word somehow lost all its menace in the last 1,000 years. To the palace, she adds. Ah, there it is. The menace is back. Turns out the emperor, that one of his officials, has heard of you. Not just the bread, not just the shop, but you. The Viking who bakes, the foreigner with honeyed rolls and a fixed oven, and, allegedly, a goat that understands Greek. You're to appear before the legathit, to Genekutha, fiscal minister, himself. Historians still debate what exactly prompted the Byzantine bureaucracy to take personal interest in local artisans like yourself. Some argue it was an effort to promote civic morale. Others say it was a convenient way to monitor tax evasion under the guise of public praise. Either way, you're going. You leave the shop in Amara's capable hands. Eirik offers to accompany you, sword in hand, until you remind him this is a diplomatic summons, not a raid. The palace is everything you expect gold. Marble, mosaics, so intricate they make your eyes ache. You walk past statues of long-dead emperors, through gardens where peacocks shriek like possessed demons, and finally into a chamber. So echoey, you half expect your own heartbeat to start lecturing you. The official in question greets you with a curious smirk. Valbrand, he says, rolling the R like it's a flavor to savor. The one who brought bread to Byzantium. You want to correct him, Byzantium already had bread. Thank you, but you smile politely and nod. They don't ask you for taxes. Instead, they ask for a demonstration. That's right. They want you to bake here in the palace, in front of witnesses. No pressure. They lead you into a side kitchen that smells like rosemary and prestige. Everything gleams. The tools are strange, oversized, ceremonial almost. You half expect them to hand you a golden spatula engraved with imperial decrees. Instead, you get flour, real flour, good flour. You work, you knead. You hum a northern lullaby under your breath as you shape the dough. Somehow, the moment feels sacred. When the bread bakes, the scent draws people, courtiers, advisors, even a few stern guards who pretend not to notice but sneak closer anyway. And when it's done golden, soft, crackling at the edges, they all taste it and they swoon. The minister claps. Someone cries. The eunuch writes something down and nods with solemn approval. You're offered a position, an official title, Imperial Assistant of Culinary Morale. You decline not because it's not flattering, but because your bakery, your corner of the city, your place matters more than any gilded kitchen. You return to your shop that evening, exhausted and smelling of rosemary and politics. Amara greets you with a shrug. Business was good, she says. We're out of plum jam. Did the goat behave? He tried to marry a broom. You don't ask further. The night winds down with quiet satisfaction. The city hums. Your oven glows. Eirik sings an old sea shanty off-key while cleaning. Trays. And somewhere far off, the cathedral bells chime like a lullaby. You didn't know you missed. You sit at the back of the shop with a crusty heel of bread and a cup of weak wine, and you realize something unexpected. You've changed, not just from warrior to baker, but something deeper. Byzantium hasn't erased who you are, it's added to you, like layers in pastry, flaky, confusing, sometimes a bit burnt, but warm all the same. You still keep your axe, of course, but these days you keep it in the broom closet, just in case the goat gets ideas. The days blend together now like dough rising, bound under a lazy sun-slow, warm and slightly unpredictable. Your hands move through the motions before you even think. Flour, water, salt, yeast, knead. You have muscle memory where once there was only battle reflex. And instead of sizing up the terrain for ambushes, you now size it for foot traffic wet hours. Get the best crowd. What corner draws more hungry clerks than tired priests? One of your regulars, a soft-spoken mosaic artisan with blue-stained fingertips, tells you the emperor himself tasted your honey loaf. That can't possibly be true. Or maybe it is. In Constantinople, everything is either grandiose truth truth or poetic exaggeration, and you've stopped trying to separate the two. Your fame, such as it is, grows, not in the way of war songs or long-sailed raids, but in quiet nods and whisper gossip. You, a Viking, have become dependable, familiar, comforting even. The man who brings crusty rye to the old widow down the street. The baker who makes apple bread during Lent, though apples are out of season and everyone knows you probably smuggled them in through some shady Armenian trader with a pocket full of relics. And speaking of shady traders, you've made friends or at least market acquaintances with a group of spice sellers from Antioch. They smell like cloves and bad decisions, and you trust them as far as you can throw a millstone. But they're entertaining, and they offer cardamom in exchange for rye twists. So you tolerate their nonsense. One afternoon, while adjusting your chimney fluich is determined to remain crooked no matter how much Eric threatens it with, an axe you hear a ruckus outside. A group of Latin crusaders, dusty and wide-eyed, are pointing at your sign, Viking. One mutters, as though that word alone might summon a bear or a war horn. Bakery. They come in 3 of them, all muscle, chainmail, and the smell of 3-month-old goat cheese. You welcome them, of course, but you keep your hand near the broom closet. Not for your axe, but for the broom. Prepare, it's sturdier. They want to know how you ended up here. You give them the short version. They want to try real northern bread. You serve them your dark rye with a smear of fig paste. They inhale it like starving wolves, and then, almost inevitably, one of them asks if you'll sell the recipe. You laugh. Then you realize he's serious. They offer a pouch of silver, more than you've seen since your raiding days. Enough to replace the oven, rebuild the roof, and maybe bribe the goat into silence. But you shake your head, because that bread, that's yours. It's not just flour and time. It's all of a Tur, broken longship, your calloused hands, your stubborn hope. You didn't learn it from a scroll or a market hag. You became it. They don't understand, but they respect it, sort of. One of them calls you the flower berserker, which is either a compliment or a culinary insult. You'll take it. Historians still argue whether Viking influence in Byzantine daily life extended beyond the elite Varangian Guard. Some scholars suggest that foreign settlers were more involved in the social and culinary life of the empire than previously assumed. Others believe those were isolated incidents, colorful footnotes in an already flamboyant manuscript. But you know the truth. You're not a footnote. You're a crusty chapter with raisins. In the margins, evenings now end with Eirik playing a lyre. He bought from a blind monk. He's terrible at it, which makes it perfect background noise for baking. Amara has taken to writing down your recipes in neat, looping Greek. You catch her one night adding notes in Old Norse to. She shrugs when you ask. In case you disappear, she says, not unkindly. Someone should remember. You pretend it doesn't make your chest ache in a strange, warm way. One rainy day, you're invited to a wedding, not just to attend, but to bake the bride as a customer. The groom is a former palace guard who once tried to arrest your goat. You all moved past it. You bake for 2 days straight. Honey rolls, braided loaves, sesame twists, rose petal buns, and a giant centerpiece, shaped like a Byzantine double-headed eagle, which tips over slightly to one side. Byrick calls it the flying chicken. You let him live. The wedding is loud, joyous, ridiculous. Someone juggles dates. Someone else drinks until they mistake a marble pillar for a cousin. There's laughter, clapping, dancing, and your bread vanishes faster than you can say Nordic glutens. You don't miss home, not because you didn't love it, but because home now smells like sesame and cardamom, sounds like lyre music and temple bells, and includes a goat named Basil, who once headbutted a magistrate Dot. And really, what more could you ask for? You return that night soaked, smiling, and just the tiniest bit drunk on sweet wine and olive oil. The city sleeps. Your bakery glows, and you form a raider, part-time philosopher, reluctant baker, finally admitted to yourself. You belong here, not just tolerated, not just surviving, but belonging. And somewhere between your kneading bowl and the half-written recipe scroll, Amara left on the stool. You feel it deep in your bones. Maybe this isn't the saga you were born for, but it's the one you've made, and it's good, like perfectly risen bread solid on the outside. Soft where it matters. There's a rhythm to the days now, a softness to the once harsh corners of your life. Mornings arrive like old friends, with sun slipping in through warped shutters and the steady creak of your bakery's front door swinging open just a few moments too early. You don't even mind anymore. That sound means someone couldn't wait. That means you're needed not for sword or shield, but for the quiet power of warm bread. EIRIK, ever the practical one, begins tracking your ingredients with a neat tally. System: 5 loaves, 4 sacks, 3 eggs, 2 goats, though Basil insists he's not inventory. He even fashions a crude ledger from scraps of discarded papyrus and fish glue. You try not to gag when he opens it, but it definitely smells like ambition. Your mornings are no longer battles. They're preparation, quiet focus, apron tied, dough rising, oven crackling, streets outside whispering awake. You've learned to tell the weather from the texture of your dough and the mood of the pigeons who peck the WINDOWSILL. One morning, Amara stops by with news that the spice traders are leaving town heading east for the season. They offer you one final trade, a small pouch of dried sumac and a strange jar, labeled only with a sigil that looks like a fish wearing a crown. You trade them a month's supply of sourdough starter. They seem overly grateful, which probably means you were swindled. Still, you chuckle. That's what markets are for. Tricks, trade, and a touch of chaos. Then, of course, the goat escapes again. Basil somehow ends up in the courtyard of a noblewoman's bathhouse. The guards, no longer surprised by your name or profession, merely sigh and hand him back with a dry warning about animal etiquette. You nod solemnly. Basil bleats. He is, as always, unrepentant. Back at the bakery, you tweak your honey-spiced rolls with a sprinkle of that mystery sumac. The result is startling tangy, floral, unforgettable. You call them Thorskringle because it sounds impressive, even if it means absolutely nothing. They sell out before noon. Historians still argue whether foreign culinary influence in Byzantine urban markets was a two-way exchange, or more of a passive absorption by the locals. Some argue that bakeries like yours, soon official, unregistered, and maybe a tad illegal, were vectors of cultural diffusion. Others insist your type was rare, barely tolerated, a charming exception rather than a model. Either way, the locals keep coming back for your Thorskringles. One rainy afternoon, you get an unexpected visit. A member of the Varangian Guard, still armored, still gruff, though slightly older than when you last ran with that crowd. His beard is thinner, his sword is better polished, his expression is unreadable. You brace yourself. Bad news. An invitation back to the fold. A fine for goat-based civil disturbance. Instead, he says one thing. You still bake that dark rye with the cumin. You nod. He places a gold coin on the counter, carefully, like a relic or a peace offering. I'll take 3. Just like that. The wall between your past and present flickers, not gone, just thinner. You're still him. Still that Viking. Still that boy who once climbed the mast of a longship to see if the world had an edge. But now, instead of peering out at battlefields, you look over trays of proofed dough. Dot. It's not less. Just. Different dot. And when the guard leaves, no threats, no summons, no secret handshakes. You feel lighter. Like the past gave you a respectful nod and walked on. That night, Amara shares a scroll she's been translating. It's a recipe. Ancient. Babylonian. Maybe. It involves sesame, beer, and what seems to be fermented pomegranate. You both raise eyebrows. Eirik says it sounds like a dare. You agree. Dot. You decide to try it. The result is inedible, but you still laugh until your stomach aches. That failure, that sticky, pomegranate-soaked mess. It feels like progress, because failure in baking isn't fatal. You just clean it up. Try again. The next batch, with adjustments, is better. You call it imperial error, no. 2 inches and serve it in tiny portions. People love the name. They ask what happened to error, no. 1. You tell them that 1 involved goat milk and is legally classified as a weapon. Your bakery becomes a small institution, not grand, not marble-columned or sanctioned by any guild, but known, beloved. People leave notes in the cracks of the door when you close. They bring you flour as tribute. 1 elderly man offers you a family heirloom, olive press in exchange for lifetime bread privileges. You accept. You add olive loaves to the rotation. Your evenings are slower now. After closing, you sit on the bench outside. Eirik beside you, Amara reading aloud, Basil chewing something that probably once belonged to your sandal. Sometimes passers-by wave. Sometimes they stop and sit, and once in a while Someone asks if you'll ever return home. You smile real slow and you say, I am home. Because it's true. You have built something that raids could never give you. Peace, place, meaning, kneaded deep into every crust and crumb. The saga, it turns out, wasn't about battles. It was about bread. And now the year bends inward, curling toward a season of warmth and rest. The market stalls take on deeper colors: mulberry chestnut, ambergris, sellers hawk roasted chestnuts, salted plums, and candles with a questionable resemblance to the emperor's nose. You begin waking earlier, not out of urgency, but out of rhythm. Your body attuned to the bakery's quiet morning symphony, the snuff of the hearth's first spark, the flower's hush as it scatters on wood, the creak of that familiar back door. One cold morning, Amara arrives with news again not of scandal or spice, but of opportunity. A new merchant guild is forming. They're granting licenses to foreign artisans. It's expensive, bureaucratic, slow-moving, but it would make you legit. No more worrying about guards shutting you down over unpaid flour taxes or whether basil qualifies as livestock or co-worker. Eirik frowns. Bureaucracy is not his favorite flavor. Sounds like a trap. But Amara, ever clever, ever persuasive, "Bye," says with a half-smile. It's not a trap, it's a table. If we're invited, we should bring bread. Historians still argue whether early bakeries in cosmopolitan Byzantium were regulated or allowed to flourish in legal gray zones. To Gnostics to govern, to beloved to suppress. Your little shop has lived in that ambiguity long enough. Maybe it's time to anchor it. You pay the fee. Or rather, the shop does. It's self-sufficient now. That's still strange to say. There's a small ceremony, nothing grand, just a scribe, with very bad breath, stamping things with very wet ink. But he nods at you. Calls you artisan, Thorfinn. You grin. That's a new one. That evening, you hang your license on the wall crypt. Of course, because the wall itself is crooked. And Eirik refuses to admit his measurements were wrong. You let it be. It feels real that way. Customers notice. They congratulate you. One gives you a carved spoon. Another knits basil a hat. He eats it. Some things never change. Later that week, you try something wild. Chocolate, imported through Venice. Bitter, unfamiliar. You pair it with dried apricots and the softest bread you've ever made. It sells out in minutes. You're not even sure it's good, but it's new. And people crave newness. Buy in small, bite-sized doses. One teenage boy comes back 4 times in the same hour. You suspect he's developing romantic feelings toward your pastries. You say nothing. You remember what it's like to be young and to discover a thing that feels like magic. At night, Byzantium's golden domes glow like sleeping suns, and you watch them from your bakery stoop. The air is thick with spice, laughter, and the occasional cry of "Who let the goat in here?" From somewhere down the street. You don't even get up anymore. Basil will find his way home. Eirik starts writing down his recipes just in case, he says. You know, If this all lasts, you smile at that. It's the quiet hope behind the thought that this could last. That a Viking's bakery, born of stubbornness and leftover rye, could outlive its own absurd origin. Even Amara gets sentimental. She gives you a new apron, embroidered, one corner stitched with little waves, the other with a tiny loaf. You don't cry, you almost do. One evening, just before closing, a child enters alone, cradling a coin in one hand and a folded note in the other. She hands you both. The note says, "Thank you for making our streets smell like kindness." You don't know who wrote it. Doesn't matter. You hand her a warm roll extra, honey, less crust. Exactly how you remember your grandmother used to make, even though your grandmother probably never heard of honey. She grins, runs off. The coin stays on the counter. You let it, and that's the moment it hits you. This whole story, your whole ridiculous, flower-dusted journey from Viking to baker to Byzantium's softest outlaws, never about conquest. Not really. It was about scent, comfort, home. And in the end, the bread wins, always. Now let your shoulders relax a little. The oven's long gone cold, the shutters drawn tight, and the last crumbs brushed gently from the counter. Outside, Byzantium hums in low tones distant footsteps. A temple bell far off, a dog barking once, and then remembering it's too tired to care. The air has cooled, a sleepy hush resting over cobblestones, once warmed by morning bread and mischief. You're still sitting on that old wooden stool by the door, Eric's fallen asleep against the flour sacks, snoring like a small bear. Amara's curled up by the brazier, book slipping from her hand. Even Basil, chaos incarnate, is unusually quiet, curled at your feet like he's always belonged there. And maybe he always has. The night deepens, velvet thick. Your hands smell of grain and cinnamon, and something faintly like smoke proof of a day well spent. You breathe in slow, the kind of breath that says, "This right here is enough." So many roads behind you now, so many names and places and waves. But tonight you are still at peace. The kind of peace you only earn when you stop running and start needing, when you choose softness, one loaf at a time. Let the last images melt, the glow of the oven, the rustle of parchment, the warm, sweet hush of freshly baked bread. Let it all settle low in your chest, like dough rising slow and steady. Under a linen cloth, you're safe, you're home, you're not alone. Sleep well, baker of empires. End of script. Sweet dreams.